7 lies that some Protestants believe about Protestantism. I don't believe these lies anymore because I did research and read about the early church. Number 7, communion in the early church was meant to be symbolic. So the way I grew up learning is that communion is about remembering Jesus. It's a symbol, but I've researched the early church recently, and in the 2nd and the 1st century even, everyone else who was a Christian in the early church believed in this real presence view of communion, which means the communion transformed into Jesus.
Transubstantiation. And this is the idea that when Jesus said that when we eat the bread, we are eating of his flesh, and when we drink the wine, we are drinking his blood. They actually believe that whenever you take communion, the bread thus turns into Jesus's flesh, and you're actually eating a piece of Jesus's flesh, and you're actually drinking Jesus' blood when you're taking communion.
Transubstantiation is a way the Catholics now understand communion, whereas the Orthodox think of it more as a holy mystery that we don't have to try to define and explain. But from every single document we have from the early church, and we have a lot of documents, I'm going to link below a website called Early Church Writings that has all the writings of the early church, so you can read for yourself and see how they talk about communion. But they believed in the real presence view so much that their surrounding pagan culture literally accused the Christians of being cannibalists. And you can even see this view in the Bible. Every single communion passage, Jesus says, "Take, eat, this is my body. Take, drink, this is my blood of the new covenant." Paul even uses that language, "Take, eat, this is my body," when he talks about communion in 1 Corinthians. But the most compelling Bible passage is in John 6, when Jesus is giving the bread of life discourse. Jesus literally says 4 times, "Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood." You have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And so there's a huge crowd, and his disciples who'd been following him around, not like the 12 apostles, but just some of his disciples who'd been following him around, begin to leave. They literally leave. And they're like, this is a really difficult passage. And instead of clarifying that maybe it's a metaphor or something, Jesus keeps saying, "You must eat my flesh and drink my blood." 4 times in this passage, people begin to leave. Doesn't seem like a metaphor. I really invite you to go through the New Testament and 1 Corinthians, read all of the communion passages, read John 6, then learning that in the 1st and 2nd century, every Christian saw it as the real presence and saw communion as being transforming into Jesus. It's difficult to view communion as not being the real presence that Jesus seems to be directly speaking about when he was on earth.